On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're going to discuss Quinyon Mitchell and if the fact that he played in the MAC at Toledo will go into his play as a rookie, plus some UDFA talk, Djax McCoy on Chip Kelly, all that and more on a Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
On Eagles fans, this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louie DiBiase, one of your two hosts for the day. You can also find my work over at Bleacher Report. Same with Gino Camilleri, our scouting director. On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, some Quinyon Mitchell talk for you. Got some UDFA talk. Who is going to be the undrafted rookie like a Reed Blankenship a few years ago that plays for the Eagles this year, a pretty important role? And then LeSean McCoy and DeSean Jackson tell all on Chip Kelly. Our thoughts on that as well. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use that code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Gino, I thought about Quinyon Mitchell yesterday or 2 days ago. I did a podcast on the top 10 most valuable Eagles heading into 2024. And then you did a show yesterday discussing just the loaded NFL when it comes to offenses and how many teams are 3-4 deep when it comes to like legitimate weapons, which got even more into my thoughts about Quinyon, his value, even as a rookie heading into 2024. I said he's a top 10 guy when it comes to value on this roster because I think if a corner this year is going to have the assignment of saying, hey, all game long, we need you to cover and shadow a CeeDee Lamb, I think that's Quinyon Mitchell. I know Darius Slay has been that guy over the last 4 years for this football team, but I'm not sure if he's still that guy in 2024. I think Quinyon has a better chance of being an all-pro talent even as a rookie. So I think some people kind of push back on that a little bit, and some made some comments about the Toledo thing, how he's not used to playing these kind of guys yet. And I don't know, Gino, we've discussed it on the show before, like his traits, just because he played at Toledo, nothing about his traits say it won't translate to the pro level. And it's not like he didn't have offers to go to better schools. Like Nick Saban said after day one of the draft, he tried to get Mitchell through the transfer portal, but Mitchell wanted to stay at Toledo. Like he could have been a Bama corner if he wanted to. So I think the college thing is just sometimes you have to play a part of the evaluation process with where they went to school. But with Quinyon, I don't think it impacts it whatsoever.
One of the first things you learn in scouting is that you don't scout the logo, you have to scout the player.
Right, which you've said on the show before.
What it's always come down to. Because if you were to scout the helmet, you'd walk away with some players that played at Alabama, but were they great players? I.e. D. Milner 12, 11 years ago whenever he was drafted as a corner out of Alabama. But I feel so bad for these college kids going into the NFL, the ones that do stay at school, where it's like, oh, you're knocked if you do stay at Toledo, but you could be a kid who transfers 3 times and you're looking at in a different light. And it's a lose-lose situation for them. But if you turn on the tape and see Quinyon Mitchell and you're going through what they call position specifics for cornerback, you're talking about zone man versatility. You're talking about his footwork in the open field, his ability to stay in phase with some of the fastest receivers. Heck, one of the knocks on our mock draft show when we traded up for Terrion Arnold was that he was a quote unquote 4.5 guy when you saw him run the 40. Well, you turn on the tape, you see he's faster than that. But Quinyon, you turn on the tape, his feet and his footwork and his speed match what he ran. It matches what he showed at the Senior Bowl, which Howie Roseman sounded off on the importance of that, seeing him in man matchups. He comes downhill and he tackles. He hits all of those skill position traits that you were looking for. And then you just talk about the core traits of the player himself, his competitiveness, his play strength, his size, his athleticism. He meets what you want in a top 22 pick, man. And he was a through and through first rounder for that team, regardless that they needed a cornerback. And Terrion Arnold was in a interview today, and he said that he got a call from one of the coaches in Vegas that it was a coin flip, not a literal coin flip, but a coin flip between him and Bowers. What happens if Terrion Arnold is picked at 14, let's say? Do the Eagles even have an opportunity to go and get?
They'd have to trade up, dude. I mean, that's the thing is there are some players that took advantage of being at smaller schools and they were the best of a bad situation and they didn't have the right traits to translate to a bigger school or at the NFL level. Like there's many instances of that, right? Like there's reasons a lot of the best players come from the best schools. It's why the Eagles have had good draft luck. But like you said, you can't have the black and white. He played at Toledo, so therefore here is a conclusion based on that player.
Exactly.
Like that's not fair at all when he ran a 4.3. And as you mentioned, he went to the Senior Bowl, and I can't stress enough how important that week was for him because he went down there with Michigan players, Bama players, Florida State, the best of the best. And he not only was the best corner down there, but maybe outside of like Darius Robinson, who had a great week, he was the best player overall. And he was covering some twitchy route runners like Ricky Parasol, who was a first-round pick. Roman Wilson was a day 2 pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he strapped those guys. So I don't think it's fair to say because he went to Toledo that Quinyon Mitchell is not going to be someone that can shadow CeeDee Lamb as a rookie. I totally think from day one, he's going to be the corner that I trust the most, even over Slay.
I think the one game you can turn on that if you are going to scout the helmet, it's going to be the one where he had to defend all of those receivers at
Ohio State game. Sure.
Yeah, you could look at the numbers, but if you look at the film and see each and every rep, of course Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to win reps. That guy's a generational prospect, somebody who should get that type
And by the way, they didn't let him play press on those guys. He had to play off coverage, and that's tough, Gino, too.
But at the same time, though, in a lot of those reps, when he was in off, you see those situations where he's able to link back up and get on the hip of the defender, or he's able to make a play on the ball. It isn't all just at the line of scrimmage. It isn't all just in the box score. You have to look at this thing from a 30,000-foot view. That's why the draft is a holistic approach, and that's why teams whittle their board down to sometimes 90, sometimes 150 players, where guys in the media like you and I that aren't inside these buildings and fans, it's a lot more difficult. You can't measure Quinyon's ability to be a leader if you're not speaking to him, and you can't tell how he is as a person if you're not talking to the people behind closed doors.
The Toledo thing says he's a leader, Gino. Like, I don't know.
We should be there and step up and be the guy 100%.
We shouldn't be knocking him for that. He said that loyalty and relationships there meant more to him than the money of going to Alabama and that big brand of joining Terry and Arnold.
It's a lose-lose for these kids,
right?
Whatever way you.
That's a good point. And as cool as it would have been to see Quinyon Mitchell with Terry and Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry, like 3 of the top 5 corner prospects in this draft, would be sweet. But for Quinyon, I think that's a positive that he stayed at Toledo. So, and again, yes, there are players at the MAC that normally you normally don't take a MAC player in the first round. You have to be special to come from the MAC, and that's what Howie said himself.
MAC, no pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Quinyon Mitchell is one of those guys. Like, over 1,000 coverage snaps, Gino. He had 6 picks and 32 pass breakups over 2 years. That means he was breaking up or making a play on the ball almost 30% of the time. And that, again, was with off coverage. Just 54 catches on 132 targets in 2 years. Again, playing off coverage and only allowing that many receptions on over 130 targets is extremely impressive.
One quote that I love and I always go back to is when Joe Douglas was the number 2 to Howie Roseman, and they made the selection of Dallas Goedert. And one of the reporters had asked Joe and Howie, how was it okay for you to draft a player from South Dakota State that high? And Joe Douglas had such a great quote. He said, when you're looking at these small school guys, they have to dominate 75% of the time or 3 out of every 4 snaps. You look at the games in the MAC, it was Quinyon Mitchell just absolutely dominating guys. Yeah, if he's letting MAC receivers have the numbers that he let up against Marvin Harrison Jr., then we're going to get into a conversation. Oh, is he ready to handle that? But when he is making a play on the ball 30% of the time, like you said, in a system that doesn't really give you the upper hand to make plays on the ball because you're not playing what could probably be the strength of his game, which is his physicality.
And the MAC's so dink and dunk, Gino, too, which makes it even tougher when you're playing off the line.
And it's much more wide open if you watch the MAC, man. I mean, some of these quarterbacks go for crazy numbers, and, man, he was a shutdown corner in that conference to a degree, and he's only 1 out of 2 MAC players taken in the entire draft, and he did dominate 3 out of every 4 snaps when you look at that level of competition. And projection is a huge thing when it comes to the draft. And that's why giving a draft grade is crazy, because you can't really sign off on these guys for 2 to 3 years until you see what they can become. what can Quinyon Mitchell become, Lou? You said it. The number one, shadow the guy across from you in a league which is full of players like that. And we talk about having to have an important number two. Look at what happened when James Bradbury fell off a cliff as opposed to his all-pro season the year before.
Yeah, the minute you played a team that had more than one legitimate weapon is when it was a huge reason for the collapse of 2023. So, yeah, I think Quinyon Mitchell's an outlier. He's a star, and he was absolutely worth that 22nd overall pick. I want to stick on the rookie class, Gino. We've talked a lot about the picks rounds 1 through 7. There's some UDFAs, though, that I think we both like that can make an impact for the Eagles, maybe unexpectedly this year. So we'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. The Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to somebody who's got that unbiased perspective on your life. You can get that through therapy. Therapy can be different for everybody. Most of us have bigger problems than our issues with our favorite sports teams like the Philadelphia Eagles. It's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. So whether you work the 9 to 5, you work the graveyard shift, regardless, even on weekends, BetterHelp is extremely flexible with you. You can visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon and get 10% off your first month of online therapy. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon for 10% off your first month of online therapy. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, got to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you campus analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Gino and I are both big fans of the Eagles' 2024 draft class, and, that's because Quinyon Mitchell fell in their laps at pick 22. I think that's also because they moved up for Cooper DeSean. I didn't think that guys like Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and Johnny Wilson would be available on day 3. But, Gino, I will say, there are some undrafted guys they brought in that I wouldn't discount. Every year, the Eagles, they find a lot of day 3 picks that become core pieces. But even if these guys don't become core pieces, I feel like every year there's at least one undrafted rookie that makes an impact, big or small. Obviously, you go back to Corey Clement in 2017 is the big example. But even 2018, as much as we make fun of that backfield, Josh Adams led your team in rushing, and he was an undrafted running back from Notre Dame. Look at every 2019 practice squad player that helped you in the division. And then you can look at, Travis Fulgham was somebody they signed in the summer, but Travis Fulgham, an undrafted player that led your team in receiving in a season. And then, of course, Reed Blankenship in 2022. I think there's some guys this year that could make an impact. You look at a Gabe Hall, who you really liked from Baylor, the defensive tackle, or a guy I really liked from Georgia, Kendall Milton at running back. There are some opportunities for these kids.
So if you go through the whole class, like Howie Roseman said, it was a very light group this year. And to say light, they only have 6 guys that really even count towards the roster. But they did sign one of their rookies that they brought into rookie camp, and I have a really cool story about this one. Cornerback Sean Stevens of Ferris State. He came to CGS, and I walked him to his interview with the Eagles, and I said, man, we need some DBs. Philly's the place. So me and him have been going back and forth.
That's
Huge
pretty cool.
Congratulations to him. But they brought in offensive tackle Gottlieb Ayedze out of Maryland, somebody that Andrew DeCecco, who is a big Eagles Twitter guy, somebody who knows these deep names, had a day 3 grade on. I love the kid as well. You look at his size and athleticism, as well as Aneem Dankwa, the offensive tackle out of Howard, who is in the 95th or higher percentile in terms of length and height and wingspan. You look at McAllen Castle's all-name guy, tight end out of Tennessee, which they gave, I believe, $250,000 guaranteed to in a undrafted free agent contract. Defensive tackle Gabe Hall out of Baylor, who I want to touch on a lot in this show. Kendall Milton, you said it, the guy out of Georgia, could potentially be the steal of undrafted free agency. Our friends over at Locked On Bulldogs love that. Safety Andre Sam out of LSU, and then offensive tackle out of the international player pathway. He does not count for the roster. Lakin Vakalahi, who is somebody from the Pacific Islands, which you bring in these guys and let Jeff Stoutland have
Can you imagine
fun
if they did it
molding these
twice?
guys into the players that they can
If they
become.
did it twice, I
absolutely.
would make Jeff Stoutland a head coach if I was an owner of a team. If he could pull that off twice, I mean, give him
they're
a head
bringing
coaching gig.
in some good players, man. Gottlieb and Anim Dankwa. I mean, those are 2 undrafted free agents where if you look back 2 years ago, who was the kid out of the University of Buffalo that I absolutely loved?
What
that
position?
was on the offensive line. He was an undrafted free agent.
I remember exactly who you're talking about, but I don't know the
I'm
name.
drawing a blank.
But I remember it, yeah.
But they bring in these guys who, as undrafted free agents, they're going to fit height, weight, and speed. I know that I say that all the time, but dude, Anim Dankwa as a 97th percentile type of player with his length and athleticism coming
Well, that
out
was
of
Eli
college.
Ricks even last year, Gino, like another guy that, wasn't the impact player of a Corey Clement or a Reed Blankenship, but they asked to do a lot last year and to fit into a slot position that he was not used to. And I thought he had some big moments. Like he made a huge play on Sunday Night Football against Tyreek Hill. Even if Eli Ricks doesn't become anything more than a depth piece, that's a solid player you brought in from an undrafted class. So yeah, as you mentioned, it's a smaller group this year, but I think you look at like Hall and Milton specifically, there's openings at defensive tackle and running back where there's going to be competition with a lot of young kids. If you told me Kendall Milton beat out Will Shipley at the end of the summer, I wouldn't be surprised. He really caught my eye. I was not watching him at the Senior Bowl much, and I'm like, who is this Georgia player that just keeps making plays in the open field? And it ended up being Kendall Milton. I think I'm a big fan of that. I'm excited to watch him in the preseason. Not saying they're going to keep 4 running backs. He'd probably have to beat out Shipley, but I think he's got a chance, comparatively speaking.
He feels like the Trey Sermon, Kennedy Brooks equation, right? Where he's probably good enough to be a rosterable player on some other roster.
Or Corey Clement, who ends up being better than Donnell Pumphrey, who was a draft pick, right?
There's another, or Kenny Gainwell loses out on all of this situation, right?
Yeah.
And you look at Kendall Milton, I think he really kind of mirrors what they have in Saquon in terms of size, that strength in the open field, and some, not to the Saquon's level, but they didn't have that style of back. You bring in Shipley and Gainwell in that room. Those are smaller type of guys. They're going to do more as move type of pieces out of the backfield. Kendall Milton can at least be somebody that in the preseason you give him 12 to 15 carries and see what he can do. And hey, if he works out to be a guy that sneaks his way on the roster, good. But the guy that really is going to have a legitimate shot, in my opinion, Lou, to not just make the roster, but have a legitimate chance to be a rotational player is Gabe Hall. Because at 6'6", near 300 pounds, the way that he can move on the line, they don't have that type of player behind Jalen Carter that in a Vic Fangio style defense where there's going to be less down linemen, Gabe Hall can take up a ton of space and he can move pretty well at his size. Does Marlon Tuipulotu give you that? From the size aspect, yeah, but he's a little short-armed.
Not the movement,
Not the movement, and Moro Ojomo, you still really have to see what you can get in him.
Although I like Ojomo. I thought he had a good preseason before that neck injury.
But he's not a proven commodity.
Oh, he's a total unknown.
Heck,
for sure.
There's an article that came out from PFF today that said after the draft what 2 teams have to add, and they made a note the Eagles could add some guys on the interior of the defensive line. I give the young guys like Gabe Hall all the chance in the world to go and win it, and Jordan Davis, he has to go and show it. But if none of those guys step up, Gabe Hall's going to have all the chance in the world, man, behind Milton Williams, who is going to be the guy to step up outside of that big 3 on the interior, because we know who's going to get a majority of the snaps. But after that, it's a lot of up in the air, where at running back and offensive line, it's kind of like the writing is there for who the next guy up is, right? You make 2 selections on the offensive line during the draft. You go out and sign a guy in Mekhi Becton. Yeah, as good as Gottlieb, Ayadze, and Dankwa could be as undrafted free agents, they're probably going to be practice squad type of stash players, where Gabe Hall, potentially Kendall Milton, heck, McAllen Castles at $250,000 guaranteed. You don't think they're going to give him all the chance in the world to potentially be the second tight end on this roster? Absolutely. It's going to be a big preseason for these undrafted guys where, folks, 50% of the rosters in the NFL are made up on guys of day 3 or undrafted free agents.
Yeah.
That's where a bulk of it comes from.
And look, I think some people roll their eyes when you highlight undrafted players a lot and they just don't care as much about the late round picks. But if any fan base,
Philly fans, dude,
I was about to say, if any fan base can appreciate this kind of topic, these kind of players and who they could be, it would be Eagles fans. If you look at 2017 to 2023, they have needed these guys, and not just undrafted players, but day 3 selections too. That has made up a lot of your main core pieces. Like, not all of them, but I mean, the Jordan Maiolatas of the world, the Josh Sweats, like that's not a 7th round pick, but that's a day 3 selection. Yeah. Avonte Maddox. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Big
Super
V.
Bowl,
Lou. Big V.
Big V.
Yeah, Jalen Mills was a 7th rounder, folks.
Exactly. Like, and we can make fun of Jalen Mills, but he was a starting corner on a Super Bowl team. I think the Eagles definitely have some players late in the draft, undrafted players too, that could turn heads during training camp. Let's take a trip down memory lane coming up next. DeSean Jackson and LeSean McCoy, they're podcasters now, and of course, for one of their first shows, they brought up the big topic of what happened when Chip Kelly was the head coach. We got some thoughts on that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles pod.
As we continue to roll on, this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by our friends over at GameTime.co. Folks, I've been busy. I've been getting a lot of tickets. Saw a concert last weekend. I'm going to a bare knuckle fighting event this weekend. And guess where I got those tickets? Game Time. That's the only place that I'm buying tickets. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA. I know everybody here in Denver got their tickets through Game Time to go see the Nuggets unfortunately lose. But if you want to get in with some last-minute killer deals, all-in prices, the view from your seat without even having to click into the ticket, and the lowest price guaranteed, Game Time is going to take the guesswork out of all of that for you. You can save up to 60% by buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you like. My wife loves going to see a musical play every once in a while, so she gets her tickets on GameTime.co as well. So today, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price.
All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. And you guys know me. I'm a huge, big-time nostalgia Eagles guy for sure. I love to talk about the past. Do not get over it a lot with this franchise, even when they win championships. And the LeSean McCoy, DeSean Jackson, Chip Kelly beef, it's been years of, this one-sided trash talk for sure. Chip Kelly, of course, doesn't say anything about it. But, Gino, Eagles Twitter is going off on it today because McCoy and Jackson, they're on a new show, their 2510 podcast, and they went deep on what happened with Chip. And I think a lot of the stories we've heard before, I do have one pet peeve. Like, I do know that everything Jackson and McCoy are saying about Chip are correct. Like, it was one of the most enraging, illogical decisions to let both of those guys go for nothing, releasing Jackson and making up stories about his gang affiliations. LeSean McCoy trading the guy straight up for an inside linebacker was embarrassing, right? So we all know it was a manifestation of Chip Kelly's ego. It was scheme over talent. He didn't need these guys. He didn't want to deal with personalities. He was the only personality there. That's what he wanted. He wanted to be the czar, not the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. But one thing that bothers me is Jackson and McCoy sometimes paint it in a light as if like Chip got rid of a team that was on the brink of winning a Super Bowl. They were like knocking on the door. They made some deep playoff run. As much as I love that core, that's the core I grew up with as an Eagles fan, which does age me for sure. This team was they never won a playoff game together. Michael Vick was completely shot at that point. That's the only thing that I want to kind of combat with Jackson and McCoy.
You're going to have to take it up with Jason Peters, who said that he not only cost them one Super Bowl, but cost them two.
They weren't. Their defense stunk. And
no, the defense was not winning anything.
They didn't have a franchise quarterback at the time as much as Nick Foles showed a lot in 2013. I mean, they had Mark Sanchez in 2014. I don't know. Like, I didn't see a team on the rise like that. They could make an argument it cost Jackson and McCoy a ring with the Peterson core by getting rid of them. But that core with Chip was not, like, about to make a run, at least in my opinion.
Well, I think Shady said it best on the show. After you get rid of DeSean Jackson, Chip called Shady into his office. He's like, "What do we got to do with this offense to get better?" He's like, "You released DeSean Jackson.
What are you talking
Did you think
about?
we were going to get better? Like, what are we even discussing here?" And
got to feature Jeff Mail, Who I think they called out on in that
Yeah,
show.
they
Your
did
Oregon Duck.
call out a lot of Oregon Ducks, man. They called out Kiko Alonso.
Bad for the brand.
Back. Yeah, bad for that's
bad hit for the
out
brand.
of view here on YouTube today.
Yep.
But one thing that really irks me, and one thing why I'm big on the whole AJ Brown media thing, and Lou and I were at the forefront of that. We're the positivity pod, of course. There's somebody in Eagles media who is directly responsible, which DeSean Jackson said, without saying his name. He has 3 letters in his name. He works at a certain 3-letter radio station in Philadelphia. Hold yourself accountable. Hold yourself accountable for, it was your big break. We all know why you're in your position.
It was spoon-fed
right
to him by Chip
it was
Kelly, the
spoon-fed
story.
to you. Yeah, you were like a baby getting applesauce out of a jar from his mommy. You took it right from the spoon, and you've never held yourself accountable for it. Sorry, we don't yell here. But I think there's people in the media that really need to hold themselves accountable, because DeSean Jackson should have been an Eagle player for life. He said it today. He's like, I have 11,000 yards. That should be all in Philadelphia Eagles. I should be Devontae Smith, AJ Brown. No fault to you guys what you're doing, but I should be the all-time leading receiver in Eagles history. And rightfully so. That was BS. It's nonsense. It's a testament to Chip. It's a testament to the person who put out that article, and I'm not even going to give them the time of day to say their name. And it's a testament to what Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman had to overcome to right the ship and where this franchise is now. And to see and hear that discussion about how Chip was soulless, did not care about these guys. LeSean McCoy just gets out of a custody battle with him and his baby mama at the time, where he's able to take his son to school. What does Chip Kelly do? Trades the guy to Buffalo, so it's harder for him to see his kid. And then do we see the other day with Jeffrey Lurie? He's crying, talking to Jeremiah Trotter Jr., saying how much he loved his family.
It was the least likable era of Eagles football. I'll never forget in 2015.
I hate Chip Kelly.
Yeah. It was the only year I hated watching the Eagles. 2020 even. They were miserable, and that was like my favorite core, dying right in front of me. Mm-hmm. Not nearly as bad as watching 2015 when Chip just got rid of everything that was the heart of the Philadelphia Eagles, like a D. Jackson and McCoy, and brought in all these mercenary free agents that didn't give a crap about being Eagles, and they were just not good players either.
Yeah, they weren't.
And it totally, thank God it happened though, because it sparked everything that's happened since with Howie and with Jeffrey Lurie. Like, he felt like he lost his football team, and it sparked his philosophy and head coaching, like getting people friendly, culture setting guys like a Doug Peterson and a Nick Sirianni. It had to happen because you had to go through the darkness of Chip. But, man, remembering those times with them bringing it up, it was miserable to watch. I mean, 2013 was fun, new, innovative, like fun offense for half of a year. But outside of that, the honeymoon ended pretty quick.
It just really makes you appreciate those years when you do have that collective feeling. And that's why 2017, a lot of people outside of Philadelphia don't really give it the justice that it deserves, because that's only 2 years removed from one of the most tumultuous periods.
Doug
in the
did an
history
incredible
of the
job
franchise.
fixing that culture.
They went from a collection of talent, which
wasn't very talented.
DeSean Shady flamed some of those.
I'll say it's a
Eagles.
collection of robots. I wouldn't even call them talent.
It was a collection of guys to put on a jersey and call themselves Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah.
And then 2017 was what Philadelphia was. And now we're back to what this brand was, to where football in Philly isn't just putting on a jersey, putting on a helmet.
And at least last year, even when there was culture issues, Gino, or there was locker room problems, it was because they cared. Like, they were pissed off. And they were mad at each other.
Guys who care about the city and care about the fans. And
at least it wasn't lifeless, you know?
Yeah, DeSean and LeSean, you know how much they carry the love for the city of Philadelphia, man. I mean, that's where they grew up. That's where they got their bread and butter. I mean, LeSean was a Pennsylvania guy his whole life until he got traded to Buffalo. And it just felt so lifeless. And I think you got to give Jeremy Maclin a lot of credit and Jason Peters for making it out of those years unscathed, man, and being a guiding light for that team. And Jason Kelsey not losing his way of being
Lane
a leader
Johnson,
on that team.
Brandon Graham. I guess they said on the podcast today that Jeffrey Lurie had to stop them from trading Brandon Graham. The strip sack on Tom Brady might never happen.
If you want to hate Chip Kelly more,
that's
Jeffrey
the
Lurie
way
had to say, okay, crazy guy, we can't trade Brandon Graham. And no, Brandon Graham wasn't what
he wasn't who he was.
He wasn't.
Right.
But he was an emerging player at that point, and he moved into a defense that wasn't fit for him, and he still was an up-and-coming leader on the team. He did everything that was asked of Chip Kelly. And like Shady and LeSean just kept saying, the guy he was a robot, and he treated them like college kids. You can't treat grown men like college athletes that are on scholarship.
Which is what he wanted to do.
Yeah, and Nick Sirianni, you might not love what he does from an X's and O's type of perspective, but one thing you could say is he loves his players, and the players seem to love him just because he's a personable guy, man. And you can't just get collection of talent and spend billions of dollars. I mean, look at Chelsea FC right now in the Premier League and all these clubs that you just go out and create these the Eagles dream team, for example. You can't just sign contracts, put guys on a field, and expect them to perform. They're people, humans. At the end of the day, you have to respect them. Take their privacy and their actual life into account before you go and say things. That's why we don't like to spew nonsense here. But at the end of the day, Lou, I'm glad that these guys still love Philly as much as they do. And we got that moment of DeSean Jackson catching his last touchdown.
Well, I was getting to the point where they all wanted to come back, man, and they all almost did. There was almost reunions with McCoy many times and Macklin, and we got the reunion with D-Jax, and that's one thing they can be upset about. That core wasn't winning a ring, but Jackson and McCoy were only a couple years away from the Doug Peterson era, and they probably would have been on those rosters with Carson Wentz and Nick Foles and the team that won it all. And I don't think those guys would have been a reason you don't win it. So they probably would have rings. So that part they're justified in being upset about for sure. But I love that they have a podcast and we can get all these Eagles stories for sure, especially this time of year when there's not much news going on. Like it's fun to spark Eagles Twitter for sure. We'll continue to get into it all right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, Monday through Friday. We thank you so much for making us your first listen each and every day. That'll do it for today's show. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off as always. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.